this is the opportunity for me to ask now, what do I really want to do in my life? And instead of choosing what I deem might lead to a successful career or what I deem might lead to a good career that can provide for my family, what do I want to do? Welcome to the Everyday Talent Podcast. This is the podcast where you can find the latest insights on managing creative paths and creative career. I'm your host, Betty. So today's episode is actually a bonus episode and a special episode. Usually on this podcast, you'll find solo episode where I share my insights as a creative business owner and as a coach, or interviews with other amazing creators. But today's episode is actually an interview that was done with me on another podcast. This interview was done with Cheryl Lau, a coach, and this episode was originally aired on her podcast, The Thought Leaders Club. I was so grateful that Cheryl was able to share this episode with us on our podcast as well. On her podcast, this series of storytelling is titled The Quick Story, where she interviews interesting people managing interesting career about quitting or the experience of quitting in our lives. So in my episode with her, I share a lot about experiences of quitting, restarting, or my mindset about how to grow our career and how that has shifted over the years from all the way from when I immigrated to Canada as a teenager, when I went to school, when I shifted the focus of my major, and later when I developed my career and my business. So as I was sharing with her, I actually got really deep and I thought, wow, some of these moments I never even reflected on my own yet. So this is why I thought it would be really valuable to share this episode with you on the Everyday Talent Podcast. Without further ado, here's the conversation I had with Cheryl.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Thought Leader Club podcast. We are doing a quit story interview today with Betty. Some of you may recognize Betty, whether it's from the podcast or from my Instagram, but you've probably heard Betty's name here on the show before. Well, before we get started with our conversation with Betty, I want to do a quick recap of what the quit story is. So essentially, the Quit Story series on this show, it's really to talk to people from all walks of life and talk about their quit story. And again, quitting can look different for everyone. It could look like leaving a prestigious career path. It could look like leaving a relationship that wasn't working out, changing your lifestyle, quitting a certain identity. It can look like many, many things. That said, the common thread among quit stories is that the individual is really defining their own version of success instead of doing what they were told to do or being who they were told that they were supposed to be. It also involves oftentimes choosing courage over fear when it comes to really uncertain or challenging situations. And also, it involves making decisions based on your values and choosing what matters most to you. So, that is the essence of this series on the show. Without further ado, let me segue over to our guest for today, Betty. Betty, could you start us off by introducing yourself, please?
Hi, Cheryl. It's great to be on your podcast again and really excited for this conversation. So, I'm Betty. I am a filmmaker, fundraising consultant, and career coach for creatives. And as you heard in that kind of multi-pronged description of a career, I self-diagnose as a multi-passionate, and I also help creatives to find their path, and as well other multi-passionates to define who they are. And in some way, we're connected to the theme of this podcast, which is like redefine what success looks like. And I also had worked with Cheryl before for her one-on-one coaching program, and just very excited to be back on the podcast.
Yeah, you know what? Let's start here. Since you mentioned that you are very multi passionate, I'm really curious to know, do you remember when or how you first realized that you are multi-passionate and there are many hats that you might potentially want to wear. Like, do you remember when you first had that gut feeling?
Mhm. I probably didn't like use the word multi-passionate back then, but in high school, I was the student that were both interested in the arts and mathematics. So I thought at the time, oh, that's interesting. Like, especially like in a, I feel like after immigrating to Canada, I immigrated when I was 13. I still adapting to the culture here. But one of the things that I realized that people often draw a line between people who are good at math and science and people who are good at arts, especially because in the arts, like it's an elective even in high school, which it was not in China. Like you either have arts class or you don't. Um, so that was when I started getting the hint that I am a multi-passionate, but also didn't have any kind of intentional thought around how would that impact my career. I did not think about that aspect.
So, like, I think backtrack a bit. Where were you born and where did you grow up before age 13?
I was born in Guangzhou, China, and then I immigrated to Vancouver at age of 13, Richmond, BC to be specific. And when I finished high school there and went to University of Toronto and moved to Toronto, and since have lived and worked there. But right now, at this very moment, I'm also working remotely and being a digital nomad in Asia.
Okay, I have so many questions now.
Mhm.
So I think my brain is going like two different directions. Like on one hand, I want to ask about like your notions or perceptions of career when you were younger, and I also want to ask about like immigrating to Canada. So okay, let me choose one direction. Let's start with career. So like, given that you were born in China, Guangzhou, China, your family is Chinese, like what were the messages that you might have been given by family or culture or society back then about like what were you supposed to do or who you were supposed to be? Like, do you recall any of that kind
Mhm.
of messaging?
Interesting enough, like my family, I would say in retrospective, is very unconventional because I remember growing up, a lot of the message given to me were like, you can like just be, average successful person. You don't need to aim for like the top of the top because that would like be really like difficult. And so a lot of the pressure growing up was actually self-imposed. Like I remember, and I think like less for my family, but by the education system, because I grew up in the China, lots of things were like mock based and performance based. And ever since I was in elementary school, we will have rankings of like how who everybody is at relative to each other according to academic performance. And I am like I maybe naturally just like to perform well, like a lot of people. So whenever I remember like fussing about like, oh, well, instead of being number one, I mean number four this time in the exam, and my mom will always be the person be like, well, it's not that matter in the bigger scheme of things. So in fact, like I feel like it's more of that perception about what success is was from the education that I was giving in the general society and culture that I was living in, less from the family aspect. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, I recall because I did my first 2 years of elementary slash primary school in Hong Kong. I still remember when it came to report cards, they would read out who
Mhm.
got what number of A's on the report cards. And I still remember I was always number two in those years of my education. Cheryl was always number two in the class. Anyways, so I think now let's segue over to when you immigrated to Canada. Do you remember like any culture shocks or
Mhm.
any drastic things that surprised you at that time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that piece about like what success looks like no longer became so clear when I came to Canada. Less people care about marks here. People still care about marks. And I went to a high school that was predominantly Asian because Richmond is a very immigrant town, I would say. And that I think over 60% or 80, 70% even in our school are Asian students. And so lots of overachieving mindset there, and everybody was like trying to do well. However, in general, you have less of that competition going on. Like it's more about like, are you doing well relative to what the goals that you set for yourself? And so for a while, I was like lost. Like, where do I stand in terms of like my academic performance? Because for so long that was my benchmark. But then also after I got over the hump, it became really freeing in terms of being able to just look at, oh yeah, everybody wants to do different things. I want to do all these things. And so overall, it was good in that sense. Yeah.
Such a like profound realization for someone like I'm assuming like, back in high school-ish years. I'm
Hmm.
assuming around that time. That's really profound for quite a young age. What?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Wow.
guess I guess like it's just probably because when I was little, I was really gung ho to get like top of the class and to be identified as that, and then you go to somewhere that's like that means nothing for anybody. It doesn't make you like more popular in school. It does not make you like have more friends, or it does not make you fit in more. And then now as a teenager you have to re-navigate. I feel like our minds are always re-navigating what's the survival mechanism here. Then yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So then in that case, when you went to post high school education, so university, did did this mentality continue to hold, or were you, because one thing that I hear from people is that maybe they were doing good in high school, but then when they go to university, everyone's like at a different level of
Mhm.
achievement. So, when you were now put into the university context, did your like perception of who I'm supposed to be, did that shift at all? Or were you still really in tune with like figuring out who you want to be?
So I have a very strong memories of like that threshold going from high school to university, because my original goal was to go to the Ivy Leagues, and I like studied really hard for 2 years for SAT. And just shortly before that I was an ESL student. So like that journey for me, I feel like it was like even more memorable than someone who was a natural English speaker growing up in Canada. But the deal that like I guess I make with my parents was always, if I get into one of those schools that give me full scholarship, I would go, because my family does not have the means to like pay tens and 100K for my undergraduate. And so again, there was like a story of like self-imposed pressure. No one really asked me to do that, but I really wanted to. I think also like that culture shock and adapting to a new life in Canada. I wanted to even like go to a further place to explore my identity or my life and possibility. So the result of that was I actually got in some schools. I got in like the NYU, Berkeley, but none of those schools were giving me enough of a scholarship to cover the expense. So actually, with the not like with the knowledge of that, I had to make a choice to stay in Canada. And that's a long story short. I guess that's why that pivotal moment, like remember coming back to home one day and realize that I would now stay in Canada and not go for any of those like top programs I wanted to, and had a huge cry and feel like I failed somehow because I got to some school but not my top choices. And after that moment, it shifted everything. I was like, well, then I'm not going to, because I was originally applied for math programs and business program. And I was like, this is the opportunity for me to ask now, what do I really want to do in my life? And instead of choosing what I deem might lead to a successful career, or what I deem might lead to a good career that I can provide for my family, what do I want to do? That's when I made the decision to transfer from business school at U of T, which I already got acceptance, to humanities.
Ah, I think what really stood out to me in your sharing is actually there was a few nuggets that really resonated with me because I also applied to American schools when I
Mhm.
was going from high school to university. I actually also got into Berkeley, which was my dream
Mhm.
school at the time.
We could
And
have met there in an
yeah,
alternate universe.
it's crazy because we both went
Yeah.
to U of T and we
Yes, we
could have
did.
both went to Berkeley. We
Yes. Oh my God.
we we might have met
Yeah.
somewhere.
We would have
But
met either way. That's
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I remember I can only, imagine how back when we were like what 16, 17,
Mhm.
we all we really knew was like university applications and like what
Yes.
do we do after graduating high school? And like
Mhm.
to have to work so hard and then kind of like not make the goal that we had, it can feel crushing at that time.
Mhm.
So like when you said that you had the big cry that day, I was like, it's bringing up a lot of memories for me also. And I'm sure for a
Yes.
lot of listeners right now who identify as, high achievers, very hardworking people, they probably had some sort of similar experience where they worked really hard. They did all the right things, they did well, just didn't pan out the way that we expected. Yeah. And I thought it was really cool how you switched from business school to humanities because that's actually I have a question. When
Mhm.
you think about the department that you were in the humanities, were there a lot like demographically, were there a lot of this is going to sound really stereotypical of me,
Yeah, but there are a
but
lot of
were there
Asians.
yeah, basically that
Mhm.
was my question.
Not like so the first year I was in University of Toronto, I just kind of took like a lot of different classes, English, lit, drama, cinema studies, and some social science classes. Not a lot of Asians at cinema studies at the time. I could count with one hand. English literature probably more, but yeah, it's definitely like definitely a minority back then.
Yeah. I'm so curious to know, like, when you were in university and
Mhm.
you made that transition, like, did you ever feel less than in a sense? Like, because for
Mm.
most Asian people, we were kind of told to go into the sciences or business or
Mhm.
something like that, or engineering. Did you
Mhm.
ever feel a little bit out of the box in that sense?
It was definitely out of the box, as in even my family who are pretty artistic are like, oh wow, that's bold. And recently, actually, I never shared this publicly. My mom and I were chatting, and she told me that a lot of her friends at the time had asked her, why would you allow your daughter to make that decision? And and I was like, wow, mom, you never told me. I was like, why would I tell you? That would just give you pressure. And I was like, so why didn't you? Why didn't you talk to me about like, because apparently one of her friend even said like you have to like act like give her some pressure in terms of like they are kids. You have to like, stop them from making wrong decisions in life. And my mom was like trying to think about what her rationale is at the time when I interview her back. And she said, like, I didn't bring her to immigrate. Like the family didn't bring her to immigrate so that she deals with all that like pressure again. Like it was really about like having a freedom of life. And I was really touched, thinking that I was so proud of my mom. Mom, I love you. So not I didn't I guess like that why did I share that story? I feel like my family actually protected me in those moments. And I fully felt the freedom of like exploring. And at the back of my mind, I was like, well, if this doesn't pan out, I can go back to do my math degree.
Oh my God. I I don't know if anyone can
Oh,
see it. If you zoom in, you can probably see like a little tear in my the corner of my eye.
I can see that.
I don't know why I'm so
Mm.
touched right now, but oh my God, that wow.
Mhm,
That that is so much respect for both you and your mom for
mhm.
really like protecting your dreams and your decisions and having your back. that is beautiful. And it's like, I think I'm curious to know, like, what do you think your mom saw in you? This is totally off script, by the
Mm.
way.
Yeah,
Like,
it's totally off script. We did not talk
yeah,
about this before.
yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
I'm so curious to know, like, what do you think your mom saw in you? Because she
Mm.
could have been like, you know what, my daughter like does not have any talent in this industry. I should probably tell her to change back to math or something. But
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
she must have saw something in you, whether it's talent or grit or something. What do you
Probably
think she
grit.
saw?
Grit is a good word. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because even
Okay.
in sharing this out loud, I'm thinking, I probably somewhere along in my life, I had asked my parents, why don't you give me more pressure? Like so and so parents. And they are like, well, don't you think that you already given yourself enough? Like, so they were also kind of assessing. Like, I feel like if I had been a kid that was not trying at all, they would probably intervene. So all is to say, I feel like my mom felt that like I deserve a chance to explore what I want. And also she knew her kid was someone who, if she put her mind to something, she would actually work on it instead of taking it like lightly. Yeah.
And I know this was a relatively recent conversation with you and your
Mhm.
mom, but like, do you feel like since that conversation that has now shaped maybe the coaching that you do today with your clients?
Hmm. Great question. Since I became a coach, I think I just become more in tune with my own history of like how my perception, because in order to coach other people about their perception of career, I also do a lot more self-reflection now. So every time that I feel like I'm always like peeling myself as an onion. Every time I peel another layer, I'm like, oh, how does that apply to like our general, what does everybody think other than me? So it probably has subconscious impact in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, because I asked that question because I was wondering, you know, how many of your clients do you think struggle with, like, they may not have that sense of support from people around them that the way you did.
Mm.
And I wonder, you know, how I was just like, I think the imagery in my head right now is like, how are you filling in that gap for a lot of your clients? Because, you know, your
Oh, I
clients
see
are
where
in
you're
the
going.
creative sector and it
Mm-hmm.
may be for some of them, people around them just don't get it.
Yeah,
Maybe. So I was just wondering, like, you know, since you had that really profound interaction with your mom, has that helped you become even more empathetic or like, I was just really curious about that.
definitely. So I coach, like you said, I coach clients that are primarily working in the creative field. And definitely they're along their path, whether it's their family and the society or other friends, or they're having some narrative of being misunderstood is always present in their career path. So alongside with that, I guess the new perspective I gain is that with the narrative of being misunderstood, that also comes with like the narrative of like support. So if you're misunderstood by someone, necessarily if you arrive at this place, you also got support from not necessarily one person, but yourself or people who believe in you. So in the coaching world, as of course I'm there to like provide them support and that like encouraging you can do this. It's also uncovering those narratives of like when we're down, when we're in like a place of feeling discouraged, we always only notice our side of like being misunderstood, but also what have been the place of strengths, the place that they got support from themselves. What were those inner voices that like got them where they got to today and make the choices, albeit difficult. Those are also my job to uncover with the clients so that they can find that inner strengths and the strengths among their network and their support group so that beyond our work, they continue to thrive.
Mm, mm. So you know what? Now I'm gonna jump back to your story because what you just
Mm-hmm.
shared reminded me of a question I wanted to ask you, which is along the lines of being like misunderstood. Like, could you share? I'm so curious to know, Betty. Like, were there
Mm.
any parts of your journey where you initially felt like misunderstood yourself, but then you realize that this was just an identity or a self, it's just something that you had to quit, right? You had to, that's something
Mm.
that it just isn't you, and that you need to let go of this notion.
Hmm. Well, throughout, we left out of my life story around university time. Throughout university, I felt like whenever I eventually landed, so context, I eventually landed in the double major of Asia Pacific Studies and cinema studies. One is a social science, one is a humanities degree. And so I interact with like people who are film lovers and film nerds and like, emerging filmmakers, or I interact with people who study international studies. They're about to become like, and Cheryl would know this reference, like Trinity kids who are about to become like aspiring politicians or lawyers, and they're quite like overachieving. So like between those two worlds, I always feel like there's a little bit of like put down one hat and then wear another. And I was quite conscious that like I even act differently in different, like going from the different physical locale of those two departments, because I wasn't fully one or the other. Like that was another phase in my life that I realized I can wear multiple hats. I like this and that. But some people were already quite like certain. I don't know how people are so certain so early on. Like, okay, I'm going to go to law school after this, or I'm like fully going to be like, a film academic. I just did not have a like, any degree of certainty. I knew that like I'm interested in all these things, but I did not have any degree of certainty that must be like my path. So when I talked to film kids, like I remember there was like one class that like everybody go around the circle and everybody was sharing their story, and they all had an element. And growing up, I hate math. That's why I'm here. And I was like, oh, that's not my story. So I was like very conscious that I was already 60% fitting in completely in a group, and probably had has some anxiety attached to like, why do everybody seem to fully fit in? Looking back, of course, maybe everybody was not like also had that narrative in their mind. But long story short, I feel like I only after, coming out to society and work, that I quitted those like unnecessary, looking back unnecessary, but at the time felt really real kind of mindset around I needed to completely be one or the other.
Mm. And I totally see how, this kind of realization when you were still in university, this realization then segued into the many different hats that you've worn, like professionally
Mm-hmm.
since graduating. So could you give us a overview of what have you done since graduating from university?
Mm-hmm. So since university, so for a few years I was working in film festivals while developing my independent filmmaking career. The thought there was very much like I want to be a filmmaker, but I also want to build connections and community. I know nobody in the film world growing up because I'm an immigrant, and so and my first employer, the Toronto Real Asian Film Festival, was very they were like a really great community, and I got a lot of experience there. So I started working there, and I'm also like them develop from there different contracts with different film festival. And throughout, like after I think now looking back, probably 5-6 years of working in that intense capacity, like filmmaking, film festival, I was also tutoring to supplement my income. I got really burned out, not to like, not because I had great employers, but then I was just like, what am I doing? Because I was working so much that I did not feel like I was like even creatively inspired as a creator. So at one point, I had thought, how do I even navigate any of this like multi-interest? Because now at that point of my career, I was at a bottleneck. I developed some skills as a fundraiser manager and all that stuff, but like also still is a master of none. And that's when I went back to grad school and did a degree in something that is also very broad interest. It's called the Master of Design Thinking, Strategic Foresight Innovation. you learn like a way of thinking about business and like change management. And along with that, I started branching out essentially in my career. I started working in fundraising consultancy, not related to film at all. And then simultaneously, that actually gave me more time to work on my own films, which I had a hint that was going to like happen. And then the pandemic happened, and that was at the tail end of grad school. And I started to realize actually, just because I went to grad school, I didn't change. I learned new skills, but then what I was passionate about didn't change. The fact that I was a multi-passionate did not change. I thought I would come out from grad school and be okay to go to like a corporate job to do design thinking or something. That did not happen. So I really looked inward. It was also around the time that I worked with a leadership coach and a therapist. What I was interested about are still interested in telling story, still interested in making art. And one new interest I realized is I'm very interested in supporting individuals to grow. In any of my career's journey, that was always an interest. So I went to learn coaching, leadership coaching, and I combined that with the stuff that I learned from grad school and started kind of like having a seed of the idea that I could really do this and to serve the people that I'm passionate about. And fast forward 2022, I started doing all these multifaceted things full time on my own. Yeah.
I would love to dive into. Oh, there's so many different parts I want to dive into. Okay, I'm gonna pick one. I want to tell us about the population that you now work with as a coach. So for context for people, if it wasn't clear, Betty is a coach. Betty now coaches creatives. But could you tell us, give a little bit more context of what do you coach on?
Mm-hmm. So broadly speaking, I coach individuals who are creators, and I have the broadest definition of creators. Like as long as you are serious about your craft in a discipline and you find creativity in there, that's for me, in my book, you're creative. So I've coached people who are photographers, filmmakers. I've also coached people who are creative consultants, arts leaders, like that working in nonprofits and such. And I work with people. I have two programs. One program is called the Mindful Reinvention, meaning people who are kind of at the mid-career spot, and they're wondering, like they have an intuitive sense this is the moment to pivot. But the pivot might look like completely change industry or job, but also might look like something internal. And then last year, I launched a new program that's called Design Your Links, which was very much in response to, I realized more and more people come to me who are also people who have like realized they have multi-passion in their career links. And I have this creative archetype quiz that people take. And one of the resort is that people who are parallel universes, they hold different universes. And there's like a huge like ratio that people who take that quiz end up being that resort. And they come to me and like and wondering how can they kind of co-hold those different links and grow them simultaneously. So that's what the Design Your Link program is. It's more close to a business coaching format, and we do it in a more intensive way. And yeah, that's where I am at. So two programs and broadly serving creative people.
So what I'm also hearing is that, okay, I know we're doing the quit story interview. So what I kind of heard was one program was more like the reinvention one. It's more like quitting, maybe the like shedding an identity that you've had for many years professionally. That's kind of what I was picking up. And then for the latter, it's like you are quitting the notion that you need to do one thing and do it really well. You can't be multiple parallel universes. You're shedding that identity and embracing the parallel universes, as you said. Okay, very cool. Yeah, I was curious about that because I think this will give the audience more context about what Betty does, but also obviously I'm trying to connect all the quit stories that I can glean from this conversation. So that was that. One thing that I'm really curious about is, you know, did you ever consider yourself an entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial person? Like before you
Mhm.
started your coaching business, did you ever consider yourself entrepreneurial?
The short answer is no. I've been told I'm very like entrepreneurial before I started the coaching business, but I never like have any kind of like sentiment around that word. I neither feel good or like bad about it. And I realized later, actually, side notes, lots of my clients who are actually solopreneurs and doing similar things like me, they have like run their own practice. They also don't identify with that word. And I don't know what it is, but definitely like, and I know this is the quick story topic, like definitely only after like I run like my business full time that I started like embracing the entrepreneurial hat officially in my mind, but also correcting some of the employee mindset stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I resonate with that also because I think although back when I was side hustling, I saw myself, I would tell myself, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a side hustler. But then when I thought back on it, I'm like, I would lean more towards a side hustler versus like an entrepreneur identity. But ever
Mm.
since I became full-time in my business, that entrepreneur identity, for some reason, it became more prevalent for me. So I totally resonate with what you just said.
Mm.
That said, I want to ask, since starting your coaching practice, were there any identities that you had to embrace and like take on since starting
Hmm.
the business?
The word that comes to mind is uh, a serial risk taker, the identity of, because, and I think this is related to the correcting employee mindset shift. And I wrote at the end of like last year as part of my podcast episode and also a blog that, once you start your business and you're like, oh, now it's really happening. Now I'm like running it. One thing I notice about myself is that I get more comfortable with taking risks, not just in business, but also in life. And that's what led to like, some major decisions about trying digital nomad life and stuff. Because once you do it once and you realize you're okay, you might not be successful every time about the risk that you take, but you realize that you're not mentally dead or like you're not like in danger. Because that's what we think when we take risks. It's like, oh, this is very dangerous. Our survival mechanism comes in. And you're like, oh, and I'm like, I can take another risk. I can try that new thing. So that's the biggest thing that I've embraced, which I never really consider. I have never really considered that I'm like, I've considered myself as like adventurous in some like life and career decisions, but I would never have said up to like the point that when my business that I'm a serial risk taker. Yeah.
Serial risk taker.
Mhm.
That's a great phrase. Very quotable. Totally see a quote, like a caption graphic coming out of this. That leads me to another thing I was wondering, which is like you mentioned risk taking. I think a lot, I feel like some of the audience members listening to this right now might hear serial risk taker and in the context of starting your business or becoming an entrepreneur, and they're like terrified
Mm.
of
Mhm.
just the notion of risk. And
Mhm.
yeah, I was wondering if you have any words of advice to anyone who who feel like they have a spark of entrepreneurial spirit in them, or maybe they just want to start creating something online, or maybe they want to start a business, but maybe no one around them is entrepreneurial or entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
so they just don't have examples nearby. Like, what would you say to someone who might be feeling a little bit scared, but they want to do something?
Mhm. The first thing I would say is that like I would caveat, I would right away kind of ask, and this like what you're raising is like really real in my coaching room. It happens all the time. And so like what are they imagining the risk that they're taking? Because there's like different kinds of risks. Like even I say that I'm a serial risk taker now. I'm not taking reckless risk because I think that's where people's mind comes go to. It's like quit my job tomorrow and pursue this like passion project. very in practice, I've met very little people who have done that without some kinds of like reassurance that so take calculated risk. That if we are okay, if we can align that we are going to take calculated risk, then my advice there is that like chances are we've all been, even if not entrepreneur and you don't identify with that word, we've all in some way in our life been have had experience of creating something out of nothing. So especially the people that I coach, like they're creatives, they're doing that daily. They're like imagining something and then they create it, turn that into art. There is something very entrepreneurial about that, like that you're able to perceive an idea, like envision an idea and turn that into reality. So, but that's also like applicable to people who are in different industry. What are some evidence in your past that wait, like you have like taken risks or you have like turn a vision into something tangible and grounding yourself in that strength. And then just ask like what is the immediate first step that make you feel a little bit scared but not completely threatening, because we won't grow or we won't really sustain the action plan if we're always like feeling so like our scare level is like up here 10 out of 10. It's got to be something that is like a little bit scary but not so scary that like frees you.
What was something in your coaching practice or entrepreneurship journey thus far that was at one point it felt really big, but then you took like a small step towards? Like I'm just curious to know, yeah, what was something that used to terrify you and felt huge, but now it's like you built your
That's a
confidence
good
for it.
question. I have to think for a couple seconds for that question. You can think of an example from the consulting practice I do because I simultaneously do that. Because I guess like a little bit coaching too. I used to like I think at the beginning when potential client interests come to me and they kind of like explore a project with me that I don't have really an existing program to offer in response. Like it's like, oh, I haven't essentially I haven't done that before. Like I have some I can see why you came to me, but I don't know whether I'm like, that spot that you're like, this is like really like a lot of complexity to navigate with this project. I used to, my default response is like, just say no, right? Like, or there's obviously like there's a part in you that you're like, wow, this could be like amazing, but it will be like a lot to navigate and learn and stretch yourself. And even like a little bit imposter syndrome is kicking in. Like, am I even like, why did they come to me? So that used to like be very unpleasant for me because I just kind of freeze and I notice I'm aware of that like what I call fear of success. Right? You're at the threshold of trying something new and amazing, but you freeze. Now I find that my comfort level is much more higher. Sometimes it's still not a fit when people come to me and I don't have something that's like in a box, take this program. But some new projects I work on, both on the consulting and coaching, have evolved to be like, wow, it's really amazing. I am so glad that we customize something, or I'm so glad, like even the Design Your Link program came from that. A client came to me, it's like, I'm not quite your original kind of like program fit. Would you be interested to play? I feel like I'm much more attuned and open to that now.
And that ties in nicely with the notion you said earlier, which is like creating something out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
That ties in very nicely with that takeaway earlier. Cool. So, now I want to segue into, okay, so on this podcast, we talk a lot about building a body of work and building thought leadership. I'm super curious to know, what would you say you're most known for right now? As of today, what are you most known for?
I'm most known for coaching people who are have a creative passion, also have embarked on creative path, but don't feel seen.
Mm. And why do you think, or how did you become known for that? Like for the audience who's like, I want to be known for something too. Like, what are some
Mm-hmm.
practical tips you can offer to help them become known for what they want to be known for?
Well, one of the practical tips I would offer is like if you feel very like unequipped with like that, hire Cheryl and everything and join her program. That's what I did. Like it would be dishonest that that was not a huge help because I knew that I have like I think when I came to US, like, oh, I've done public speaking, I've like comfort level and certain things, but I'm not very good at like putting myself out there on social media. That was the thing. So identify what you're good at and not good at. I think it's like a practical tip. And if for things you don't good at, and there's like people who are good at that, then go learn from them, right? And then the other thing I think kind of emerged from our work, and also I feel that has like locked in me even more after we worked together over these last couple of years, is that I realized the body of work that one builds or your body of thought leadership does not just come from like suddenly like you have to sit down and write a social media post. It came from your whole life. It came from like the moment that you started working. So things that you take it for granted that are not interesting to other people or perspective that you have that we like, of course, everybody thought about that. You're really acting as like a scientist or detective. It's like, wait a second, why do I think about that way? And or does anybody think about it this way? Maybe talk out loud with other people, and then you that's when you realize that, oh, I do have some unique perspective because of my live or work experience. So everybody essentially have their body of work, and everybody has their thought leadership in that regard.
I really, really love that point about, finding thought leadership from your lived experiences, from
Mm-hmm.
your story. That's really where we should all start because that is something that is, for lack of a better word, is your truth. Like it's just something that no one else can take away from you or like negate or even argue with you on. It's your lived experience. So start there first. And, to quickly touch on the point about earlier, you mentioned imposter syndrome. For anyone who might be feeling like, I don't even know what to talk about, I feel like I'm not good enough to talk about it. Continue building those skills and like practical experiences, but start with your story. That's something that's so true to you. And it is going to be the thing that shapes the work that you do moving forward. So I am a huge fan of what you just said,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. Um, just gonna segue once again, a total like 180 or is it 360? I don't know. Just gonna do a little spin here. So the last time I saw Betty was in New York
Mm-hmm.
City for a podcast award event.
Yay!
So
Mm-hmm.
Betty, what tell the people what did you win? What did you win that day?
The category is a little bit like long-winded. I always have long-winded title, but the podcast title is not long-winded. So I host a podcast called the Everyday Talent Podcast, which is there to share stories of like what I call the messy middle for creative paths. And it won the best creativity arts slash creativity award at the Golden Cranes Award, hosted by the Asia America Podcaster Association, alongside with Cheryl's podcast there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would love to know. I didn't get to ask you this that day that we met.
Mm-hmm.
But now I get to ask you. I'm so curious, like, looking back, we know the result, you won the award, but like
Mm-hmm.
I'm so curious to know, like, why do you think your podcast is so good? Like what made your
Wow, talking
podcast
about imposter
deserving?
syndrome.
I've checked out your podcast before, so I know it's good, but like I'm curious to know from your perspective, what makes your body of work such a good body of work?
I think that right from the beginning, I felt the alignment with this like focus of the topic. So if I were to wear a critic hat and could like look at my own podcast, essentially, I think that combination of being able to tell stories of creative people who are not necessarily and like have to be this overwhelming, always like success story, and being really open about their struggle in the middle, that's already like a good starting point. And then one feedback that I often get from people is that they also appreciate that it's not just like interview podcast. It's not purely interview podcast, and also not purely someone who's just talking about their insights. It's a mix of a balance of both. So I try to like, and last year I like even have started doing one segment where people just share their daily routine. So it's constantly trying to, I think the podcasts have different formats within itself that cater to, if today you're looking for some insights, here's some episode. If you're looking for a good conversation with a creative, here's an episode. If you just have 7 minutes, but you want to hear someone how they start their day, here's an episode. So that combination of the positioning and the content is what makes it good. And this makes me uncomfortable talking about how good the podcast is.
Well, that's also a side note for everyone. Go check out the podcast, The Everyday Talents. I think one more final question I would love to poke at or ask before we segue into the final segment of today, which is some rapid fire fun questions.
Nice.
I want to know, I think it's twofold. I think the first part of the question is, are you proud of who you are today and what you do? I think that's the first question I would love to know. And, I also want to ask you, looking back at your life thus far, like what's a moment that you're really proud of, but maybe we didn't touch on so far in this conversation?
I am extremely proud of like my journey up to this point. And, again, thinking in coming to this like interview, and I know knowing the theme is like quick story. I think for a long time, like I probably like in my 20s, I probably wouldn't say that I'm that proud of my career and how things would go in the messy journey that you heard. And being able to quit that phase is nice and arrive at this place.
You made it, Betty. You made it. You did it.
And I don't know about making like, there's no one moment of like that you're in life that you're like, that's it, right? But I've made it internally, like internal peace, I've made it. And so in terms of like a one moment that is like very defining, right now, this moment is very defining. Like I just got married in the fall. One good friend of mine always says like, you always do something like radical when like people seem like this is the moment to stabilize. So, I basically like decided to build family. And then I'm like, let's go off and take off for like 4 or 5 months and try this new lifestyle. And I'm proud of those, like, again, going back to the risk taking, like it's calculated risk, right? But I'm proud of like myself, just like continuously being able to throw myself in new experience and learn and stretch myself. So I have no doubt that this period right now, that like trying the digital nomad life, looking back, it will be a defining moment in my career and life and married life as well.
Very wholesome. So wholesome. I love this.
Yay.
Okay. So as we transition to the final segment, which is going to be rapid fire, totally unscripted, random questions for us to get to know Betty a little bit more. Okay, so I'm literally going to make up some questions on the spot.
Oh, really? Okay, let's go.
It is not anywhere on my Google Docs. Okay, so, okay, I actually did ask Betty this question when I saw you in New York and we were having cocktails after the awards ceremony, but I forgot your answer, so I'm going to ask again. So I want to ask you, what's your least favorite food?
Least favorite food? I do not like, I don't know what I answered on the spot at that time, but I do not like dry shrimp.
Oh, that's a strange answer.
There's shrimp. No elaboration. It's rapid fire.
Okay. So you know what? Second question. What's your favorite, like, westernized fruits, if that makes sense? Like, books that you would, like your favorite fruit that you might see from a children's storybook, an English storybook. And what's your favorite, like, non-Western, like a more like Asian fruit, if that makes sense?
Fruits, right?
Fruits,
not fruit.
yes.
Yeah.
Fruits.
So my favorite Asian fruit is star fruit, and I'm looking at it. There's a gigantic star fruit I'm about to eat tonight. It's great. And my favorite non-Asian fruit is actually just a good, wholesome apple. That you can get anywhere. And
nice.
Apples are great everywhere.
Okay. Question number 2 or 3. What is your podcast recording tools?
I use this, is it called Riverdale FM online. And then when I'm at home in Canada, I have my Yeti microphone. But right now you can see I'm using a Zoom roll mic. And so that's it, and my computer, and sometimes my camera. Very simple.
I see. Okay. And final question. What is, if any, what is your favorite outfit that makes you feel like super Betty, like super you? Like, what's your favorite outfit?
I usually like things that are quite colorful, which is not reflected on my travel outfit right now. So anything that is like, I don't have one outfit that comes to mind, but like if you like when I'm in my element, it's usually like colorful, big color blocks, and that makes me feel like really powerful.
Color blocks, so like big contrast, I'm
Big
assuming.
contrast, yes, yeah.
Very fun. All right, Betty, thank you so much for participating in this random question segment. Before we wrap
Fun.
up, Betty, where can people find you and how can people work with you?
So you can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, or my website. And to work with me, there is a link on my website, or you can find it on Instagram and LinkedIn as well to book a free consultation call with me. And I usually go on that call and we have a good chat and we'll assess whether there's a fit there. And I'm very proud to say that I am very honest when there's no fit, and people always thank me for that. And actually, the rates that happens is quite high. It's like about 30%. So really come in and hang out and build relations there from there.
So fun. Okay, all the links will be in the show notes. You will find them. Just scroll down somewhere and you'll see it. Alrighty, Betty, thank you so much for sharing your story and for making me tear up. I don't know if people can tell
Yeah,
if they're watching the video, but like I teared up. There's like a little tear
I
earlier
need to
on the corner
journal
of my
that.
eye.
It's like
Thank you so
accomplishment today. She'll cry.
thank you, Betty, so much for your sharings, your story, and for being here. I cannot wait for the audience to glean the lessons that are relevant to them when this episode is aired. So thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for being here. I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to this special bonus episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And as I said at the beginning of this episode, there are so many moments that I share with Cheryl that I never thought, oh, wow, I didn't think about it that way. It's kind of interesting as I had to share as an interviewee and reflected again some of the defining moments in my own career and path. And I think it also speaks to the way that we think about our career sometimes is in stories. And the way that we tell those stories actually matter because it's contingent upon how we perceive a certain experience and our mindset. If our mindset shifts, the ways that we tell our career stories also shift. So I hope to invite you to also reflect on your own way of telling your own career story. What were some defining moments in your own story and journey? What were ways that you quit? What were ways that you restarted? What were ways that you shifted? Thank you so much for listening today. As always, if you like what you heard, I invite you to continue to follow this podcast on whichever podcast platform that you're listening this to or on our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to my e-news Gentle Signals where I share regular reflection on the creative path. Thank you so much for your support. May we be intentional about our creative path and our creative career. See you on the next episode.